Act 1. The pinnacle of Victorian ambition.
In 1845, the British Empire stood at the apex of its power. The Royal Navy commanded the seas. British engineers were building machines that defied the limitations of nature itself. And in the frozen silence of the Arctic, one final prize remained unclaimed: the Northwest Passage, a legendary water route connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific through the Canadian Arctic archipelago. The man chosen to claim this prize was Sir John Franklin. At 59, Franklin was a naval hero, a veteran explorer, and a man desperate for one final moment of glory. He had survived 2 previous Arctic expeditions, earned the nickname the man who ate his boots after resorting to eating leather during a starvation march, and now commanded the respect of the Admiralty and the public alike. But this would not be an expedition of desperation. This would be a demonstration of British technological supremacy. The ships selected were HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, 2 bomb vessels that had already proven themselves in Antarctic waters under James Clark Ross. But for Franklin's mission, they were transformed into floating fortresses of Victorian engineering. Each vessel was reinforced with iron plating along the hull, layers of metal designed to withstand the crushing pressure of Arctic ice. The bows were doubled, strengthened with heavy timbers and iron sheathing. These ships were built not just to sail through the Arctic, but to survive it. Inside, they were fitted with revolutionary steam engines, 20-horsepower locomotives adapted for marine use, complete with retractable propellers that could be lifted clear of the ice. For the first time in history, ships could move independently of wind and sail through the ice fields under their own power. The comfort systems were equally unprecedented. Hot water central heating ran through iron pipes, warming every deck. The ships carried 3 years' worth of provisions, over 8,000 tins of preserved meats, vegetables, soups, and even luxuries like chocolate and lemon juice to prevent scurvy. There were libraries stocked with over 1,200 books, mahogany furniture, fine china with the Admiralty crest, and even a hand organ that could play 50 different tunes. These were not exploration vessels, they were statements, declarations that British civilization could not only reach the ends of the earth, but bring all the comforts of London with them. On May 19, 1845, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror departed from Greenhithe, England. On board were 134 officers and men, the best the Royal Navy could offer. They sailed down the Thames to cheering crowds, flags snapping in the spring wind, steam engines rumbling beneath their feet. The entire nation watched them go, confident that within 2 years Franklin would return victorious, having threaded the final unmapped channels of the Arctic maze. No one suspected that every single man aboard was sailing toward annihilation.
Act 2. Into the frozen labyrinth. The voyage north was routine. Franklin's expedition followed the established route, across the Atlantic to Greenland, then north into Baffin Bay. In late July 1845, the ships anchored in Disco Bay on Greenland's western coast. Here, 5 crewmen were discharged and sent home, sick or deemed unfit for the grueling journey ahead. It was from these men that the last letters from the expedition were sent. The mood was optimistic. Franklin wrote to his wife, Jane, expressing confidence. Supplies were adequate, morale was high, the crews were healthy. On July 26th, the expedition weighed anchor and sailed north into Lancaster Sound, the gateway to the Arctic archipelago. A few days later, 2 whaling ships spotted Erebus and Terror moored to an iceberg in Baffin Bay, waiting for the ice to clear. The captains of the whalers reported that Franklin seemed in excellent spirits. That sighting, logged on July 28, 1845, was the last time anyone from the outside world would see Franklin's men alive.
the ships vanished into the white silence of the Arctic. For 2 years, there was no word. This was not immediately alarming. Arctic expeditions often spent winters locked in ice, unable to send messages. The Admiralty expected Franklin to navigate through the maze of islands, spending 1 or 2 winters frozen in before breaking free into the Pacific. But as 1847 turned into 1848 and no word came, unease began to spread through the halls of the Admiralty and into the drawing rooms of London. Jane Franklin, Sir John's indefatigable wife, began pressing the government for action. By 1848, the silence had become deafening. Where was Franklin? What had happened in that frozen void? Act 3, The First Winter and the Fatal Decision. We now know, pieced together from decades of archaeological discoveries, written records, and Inuit testimony, what happened to Franklin in those first crucial years. After leaving Baffin Bay, Franklin's ship sailed west down Lancaster Sound and then south into Peel Sound, a bold choice. Most previous expeditions had explored to the north. Franklin, confident in his steam-powered vessels, pushed south along the uncharted eastern coast of Prince of Wales Island. By September 1845, the Arctic winter was closing in. The sea ice thickened rapidly, and Franklin made the decision to winter near Beechy Island, a small, desolate spit of land off the southwest coast of Devon Island. Here, the expedition spent its first winter locked in ice. It was a period of relative safety. The men built a forge, conducted magnetic observations, and explored the surrounding area. But it was also when death made its first appearance. 3 men died that winter: John Torrington, John Hartnell, and William Brain. They were buried in the permafrost of Beechy Island, their graves marked with wooden headboards. Their deaths were attributed to pneumonia and tuberculosis, not unusual for Arctic expeditions, but later exhumations in the 1980s revealed something far more sinister: dangerously high levels of lead in their bodies. The source? The very technology meant to save them. The thousands of tin cans preserving their food were sealed with lead solder. Every meal was slowly poisoning them. But in the spring of 1846, Franklin didn't know this. When the ice broke, the expedition sailed south again, threading through the narrow channels between King William Island and the Boothia Peninsula. By September 1846, the ships were locked in ice again, this time off the northwest coast of King William Island in the Victoria Strait. Franklin likely believed this was temporary. One more winter and the passage would open. But the ice didn't melt in 1847 or 1848. They were trapped in one of the most unforgiving locations in the Arctic, a zone where multi-year ice converges, grinding and shifting, never fully melting even in summer. The Victoria Strait had become their frozen prison. And then, on June 11, 1847, Sir John Franklin died. The official records are sparse. A single note left in a cairn states he died suddenly. The cause was never recorded, but his death shattered the command structure at the worst possible moment. Captain Francis Crozier of HMS Terror assumed command. An experienced Arctic navigator, Crozier was a capable leader, but he inherited a disintegrating situation. By the spring of 1848, the ships had been locked in ice for 20 months. Scurvy was spreading, the lead poisoning was worsening, men were becoming irrational, weak, their gums bleeding, their teeth falling out. Coal for the steam engines was running low, the heating systems were failing, and the ice showed no sign of releasing them. On April 22, 1848, Crozier made the most fateful decision in Arctic exploration history. he ordered the ships abandoned. 105 men, all that remained of the original 129, prepared to march south across the ice toward the Canadian mainland, over 250 miles away. They hauled sledges loaded with supplies, lifeboats mounted on runners, and inexplicably, silverware, books, and other non-essential items, evidence that they were already suffering from the cognitive impairment of lead poisoning. A note left in a cairn at Victory Point recorded the decision. April 25, 1848. HMS ships Erebus and Terror were deserted on the 22nd April and start tomorrow, 26th, for Back's Fish River. It was a death sentence.
Act 4. The March of the Dead. The landscape the men walked into was one of absolute desolation. King William Island is a barren, windswept place, flat tundra broken only by gravel ridges and shallow frozen lakes. In April, temperatures still hovered far below freezing. The wind cut like razors. The men were hauling lifeboats that weighed over 700 pounds each, loaded with supplies. They were already weakened by scurvy, lead poisoning, and starvation. Their bodies were breaking down, muscles wasting, organs failing, minds unraveling. Archaeological evidence paints a horrific picture. Along the route of their march, researchers have found skeletons still dressed in naval uniforms, lying face down in the gravel. Scattered around them were items that revealed the chaos: a hairbrush, silk handkerchiefs, a copy of the Vicar of Wakefield, Christian medals, silverware stamped with officers' initials. They were dying, one by one, and they could not carry the dead. Bodies were simply left where they fell. Some tried to turn back, in a location that would later be named grimly Erebus Bay. After the ship they were trying to reach, researchers found skeletal remains facing north toward where the vessels lay trapped in ice. These men, too weak to continue south, may have tried to return to the relative safety of the ships, only to die in the attempt. The bay itself was named by later searchers, unaware that it marked the final resting place of men desperately crawling back toward their floating tomb. The survivors pressed on. They dragged their boats south along the western shore of King William Island, moving only a few miles per day. By summer, the ice would have broken up near the shore, forcing them to launch the boats and row. But they were running out of food. The preserved rations were gone or inedible. They hunted seals and Arctic foxes, but game was sparse. And then, as desperation turned to horror, they crossed a line. Inuit hunters from the nearby settlements later reported finding corpses that had been butchered. Bones showed marks from knives and saws, evidence of defleshing. Skulls had been cracked open to extract the brains. The men of the Franklin expedition had resorted to cannibalism. To the Victorian public, this would become the most scandalous and unbelievable detail of the disaster. Englishmen, officers of the Royal Navy, reduced to eating each other? Impossible, slanderous. But the evidence is undeniable. Cut marks on bones do not lie. By the summer of 1848, the survivors, perhaps 40 or 50 men still alive, reached the southern tip of King William Island. Some may have crossed the ice to the Adelaide Peninsula on the mainland, but none made it to Back's Fish River. The last men died scattered across the frozen tundra, alone, starving, and mad from lead poisoning. Not a single member of the Franklin expedition survived. Act 5. The Search and the Silence. Back in England, anxiety was turning to dread. By 1848, Franklin's ships were 3 years overdue. Lady Jane Franklin became relentless, pressuring the Admiralty, Parliament, and even Queen Victoria to fund search missions. In 1848, the first rescue expeditions were dispatched. Over the next decade, more than 30 expeditions would search for Franklin, the largest rescue operation in history. Ships sailed every navigable Arctic route. Sledging parties crossed the ice on foot. Rewards were offered, £20,000 to anyone who found Franklin alive, £10,000 for proof of his fate. In 1850, the first breakthrough came. An expedition led by Captain Erasmus Omni discovered Franklin's first winter camp at Beechey Island. They found the 3 graves, along with hundreds of discarded food tins and equipment. But there was no note, no indication of where Franklin had gone next. The intensity intensified. Expeditions fanned out across the Arctic archipelago, but the vast ice-choked channels swallowed ships and men with terrifying regularity. Some searchers became lost themselves, requiring rescue. Then, in 1854, a man named Dr. John Rae returned from surveying the Canadian Arctic with devastating news. While trading with Inuit near King William Island, he had acquired silver cutlery and naval buttons, items from Franklin's expedition. The Inuit told him stories: white men hauling boats across the ice, dying one by one, resorting to eating the dead. Rae's report was published in London. The British public reacted with outrage, not at the tragedy, but at the accusation of cannibalism. Lady Franklin led a campaign to discredit Rae and the Inuit testimony. How dare he sully the honor of British officers with such lies? But Rae was right. In 1859, another expedition led by Captain Francis Leopold McClintock followed the Inuit directions and discovered the cairn at Victory Point, containing the only written records ever recovered from the expedition. 2 notes, one dated 1847 and one dated 1848, describing Franklin's death and the decision to abandon ship. McClintock's team also found skeletal remains, abandoned boats, and the scattered detritus of a doomed march. One boat contained 2 skeletons and was still loaded with bizarre supplies, silverware, soap, slippers, evidence of the confusion and irrationality brought on by poisoning and starvation. The mystery of Franklin's fate was solved, but the ships themselves remained lost. For over 160 years, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror lay somewhere beneath the Arctic ice. Act 6. The Discovery. The search for the physical ships became an obsession for archaeologists and maritime historians. If the wrecks could be found, they might answer lingering questions. Why did Franklin choose that route? What finally killed him? What happened aboard the ships before they were abandoned? Modern technology changed the search. In the 2000s, Parks Canada and various partners launched systematic searches using sonar, underwater drones, and aerial surveys. They retraced Franklin's route, focusing on the waters around King William Island. On September 1, 2014, a sonar scan detected an anomaly on the seafloor in Victoria Strait. Divers descended, and there, resting upright in 36 feet of water, was HMS Erebus. The ship was eerily intact. The hull was solid. The deck was visible. Cannons still pointed from the gun ports. The discovery made international headlines. After 169 years, one of history's great mysteries had yielded a tangible piece of itself. 2 years later, in September 2016, came a discovery laden with bitter irony. The second ship was found, HMS Terror, lying in pristine condition in a place that had been named Terror Bay, christened in honor of the very vessel that now rested on its floor. The ship lay farther north than anyone expected, almost 60 miles from where it had been abandoned. This suggested the ship had drifted in the ice, or more hauntingly, had been briefly remanned by desperate survivors before finally sinking. Terror had come to rest in waters that bore its name, as if the Arctic itself had marked its grave.
Underwater footage revealed astonishing details. Inside Terror, the ship's bell was still hanging. Plates and bottles sat on shelves. Drawers remained closed. It was as if the crew had simply walked away. The discoveries answered some questions, but raised others. Why was Terror so far from the abandonment site? Did some men return to the ships after the initial evacuation? What secrets remain locked in the silt-filled cabins? Archaeologists are still piecing together the final days, conducting careful underwater surveys and recovering artifacts while respecting the site as a maritime grave. But even with the ships found, the Franklin expedition remains one of the most haunting disasters in exploration history. Not because we don't know what happened, but because we do.
So, why does this story still matter? The search for Franklin became the most expensive rescue operation in history. Over 30 expeditions spent what would be approximately 15 million euros in today's money searching the Arctic. Britain spent more looking for Franklin than they did on the original expedition itself. And here's a haunting detail. Captain Crozier, when he ordered the ships abandoned, almost certainly took silverware and valuable items with him. Why? Likely to trade with the Inuit, the very people who knew how to survive in that environment. The irony is devastating. Crozier recognized too late that salvation lay in learning from those who understood the Arctic. But by then, the men were too weakened, too poisoned, too far gone. Franklin's expedition represents the moment when human confidence collided with the absolute indifference of nature. The Victorians believed technology had made them invincible. Steam engines, central heating, 3 years of supplies. And the Arctic destroyed them anyway, slowly, methodically. The Franklin expedition didn't fail because the men were weak. It failed because they believed they were invincible. And nature doesn't negotiate. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Dr. Charlie's History Lab. Breaking through as a small creator is genuinely hard right now, and every subscriber helps keep these stories alive. I'm Dr. Charlie. This is the History Lab, and some lessons are written in ice.